Welcome to the America First Policy Institute studios. I'm Billy Atwell, our Chief Communications and Marketing Officer here. Today we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. We have Yusuf Mahmood, our Policy Director for Artificial Intelligence. We're going to be talking about some of the policy initiatives that we have going on, some of our thoughts and philosophies about how do we engage this very complicated topic. It's obviously a popular one, but it's important that we navigate it carefully. Yusuf, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So it feels like in the conversations related to AI, often people either get very doom and gloom. It's going to take over. Movies like Terminator come to mind, and the world's going to fall apart. The other side is there's nothing but opportunity. Let's just run wild and free. Probably somewhere in the middle is where we need to be. Help us kind of frame the conversation in terms of the right protections, the right boundaries, but also exploiting as much opportunity as we reasonably should out of it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you often hear people say we have to harness the benefits and mitigate the risks. It's almost a cliche at this point, but there's a reason why people say that. It's because there are a lot of beneficial applications of AI, especially human-centered applications like improving education, allowing the smartest students to excel by giving them personalized AI tutors, or in cases like healthcare where we can identify and cure diseases. Those sorts of applications that really put humans at the center, I think there are a lot of opportunities for improvements to people's everyday lives. But of course, there are also things that we have to watch out for. For one thing, we have to make sure that as the technology is developed, it doesn't only rely on, or is not only based on big tech Silicon Valley values, but it's also based on American values. It's also important that as we try to win in this race with China, as people say, we don't just win for the sake of winning, but we stay true to American values. So we have to make sure that we protect children and families, we uphold the dignity of the American worker, and that we proceed in a way that promotes human flourishing.
In an ideal world, all business leaders would prioritize the common good first, right? We know that doesn't happen. So there has to be some sort of regulation. We're usually the deregulation people, right? But we know that there needs to be appropriate boundaries on this. So when we think about balancing the business interests and the public good, how do we make sure that we have the right protections in place for particularly like the vulnerable, for children, especially as we're thinking about how it integrates with social media and the kind of content that we find on the internet? What is your kind of thought or your framework for engaging in that space, particularly around the area of like protection for those groups?
Certainly. So in general, as you say, we do have to make sure that we don't have an overly burdensome regulatory approach. We generally like deregulation, and especially when it comes to AI, this is a new burgeoning field, so we don't want to approach this with top-down regulations. But that being said, as you bring up, there are vulnerable groups, in particular children, whose interests we need to make sure that we watch out for. We've seen terrible stories of children interacting with AI chatbots in ways that encourage suicide or sexualized content to children, and that's just something that we can't tolerate. So we have to look at problems, especially with vulnerable people like children, and address those. In general, though, I think it's very important to appreciate that there are a lot of opportunities that AI can create.
Yeah. In our first conversation about AI, you said something that I hadn't really thought about enough, and it kind of scared me a little bit, I'll be honest. It's that if we aren't the global leader in AI, the consequences will be really devastating. Talk about what that means.
Yeah, so AI is a general purpose technology. I think of it kind of like electricity. And there's a really solid chance, there's a real chance that AI will be the most transformative technology in the 21st century. But if you think about this electricity analogy, imagine one country doesn't have electricity and the other does. Yeah. The country that has electricity will end up dominating in a variety of ways that may not even be easy to predict, but in general they'll have better technological innovation, they'll have better military capabilities, they'll have more productive businesses, they'll have more productive workers. And so as we think about AI, we do have to think about this challenge of geopolitical competition with China. I think the president has taken a leadership stance on appreciating the challenges that China poses to us. And we have to make sure that in general we stay ahead. It's important to talk about regulations for vulnerable people like children, it's important to talk about ways that we need to make sure AI gets right. But at the end of the day, if China ends up leading the technology, then they're the ones who get to determine the values that go into the AI systems. They're the ones who get to determine, in some sense, how the rest of the century develops. And so that's not something that we can have happen either.
Right. So if we're the global leader, let's say we accomplish that, how does that keep China from using it in the ways that we're worried about, some of the exploitive ways and so on? What is the boundary that creates on them?
Yeah, so it really does depend on how significant a lead we have and what the applications of that technology look like. So right now, China is, I believe, something like about half of all surveillance cameras in the world are in China. They're basically,
wow.
Yeah.
That's a wild statistic.
Yeah, and so they're using AI for mass surveillance. We've seen that in AI models that they produce, they tend to output Chinese Communist Party propaganda. They deny things like the Tiananmen Square massacre. They'll talk down the CCP party line, or consistent with the CCP party line on things like Taiwan. And so one kind of issue is making sure that the leading models that all of the world is using are not based on these Chinese Communist Party authoritarian values. Yeah. And we want to make sure that American values end up leading. So we want, as far as AI systems go around the world, we want to make sure that they support American values, free speech, and that they are not being used for authoritarian ends.
Yeah. AI seems different than a lot of other technologies. Some come and go. I remember the dial-up sound, log into AOL, okay, well, that's gone away, right? Yahoo used to be the leader in search. Well, that's not the case anymore. AI seems to be a completely different type of thing in that it's integrating into all the other technologies that we do have. How do we, obviously we're focused kind of in the short term of getting it right from the start, but how do we have a long-term vision for AI when it's so rapidly developing?
Great question. I think one important way that we can have a longer-term vision is by generally getting smarter about AI. And what that means is we want to ensure that we have a government that uses AI to promote government efficiency. So there are lots of opportunities to use AI to cut red tape, but also uses AI in ways that help us understand it better. We want to avoid strategic surprise. We don't want to get caught off guard when new AI capabilities come on the horizon and all of a sudden we're scrambling to take advantage of them or to react in ways that they may be negative. We have to make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve there. So I think that's one way that we can approach a fast-changing area. And then another way is just with a general sense of humility. As we talked about earlier, this is a new technology, especially deep learning, the newest paradigm that we're seeing expand greatly in AI is relatively new, and we're not sure exactly what the implications may be. There's a lot of positive potential that it has. There are a lot of harms that could result from it, and so it's something that really we need to be paying attention to at the end of the day.
Yeah. When I think about the military integration, it gets kind of scary. You think of movies where you've got robot armies fighting each other and stuff. Well, we're not necessarily all that far off. That's a conceivable reality. But what should we understand about the opportunities and some of the risks with how it integrates into military technology? I know it's already there to some degree, but that's only going to get dramatically more integrated as time goes on.
Certainly, yeah. There are companies like Anduril and Palantir that are really leading the way in integrating AI into military operations. It is important that we keep humans in the loop, and when we have to make certain critical decisions, that there are humans who are making those decisions. But that being said, you can use AI in a very helpful way to gather information more efficiently, to package it in a way that is understandable to a human who is making a decision. We can use AIs to help with strategic thinking and planning. And so there are lots of ways that AI can be integrated, and I think there are risks that you bring up. As you say, we want to make sure that when, for example, we use AIs for drones, that those, or for robots for that matter, of other kinds, we have to make sure that they're not malfunctioning in any important ways. But provided that we do that, it could make a real difference on the battlefield for our warfighters.
I'd imagine it would. I think about, in my world of communications, I think about copyright. I also think about intellectual property in virtually every sector of the economy. I also think about how AI could be used to, especially by the Chinese, to hack and steal information. And when it can be done in a way that's super scalable, because that's what AI really does, it helps scale things that would otherwise require people. It gets kind of scary. And so what do you think about both those threats, but also couldn't it be used to counter those problems at the same time?
Yeah, definitely. So there are ways that AI can be used to expand the threat landscape in cybersecurity. In other words, there are ways that you can use AI as an attacker. There are also ways that you can use AI as a defender. And so in some cases, actually, you can have what are called red teams and blue teams, where if we're trying to defend, say, AFPI from a cyber attack, you might have a red teamer who works for AFPI who tries to use AI to find vulnerabilities in AFPI systems. And then once you find those vulnerabilities, you can patch them. So you can use the same tools that attackers might use to defend. It's also true that AI itself can be a target of cyber attacks. And what I mean by that is that there are ways that AI and machine learning workloads look different than other workloads, and that introduce new unique vulnerabilities. So for example, we saw that DeepSeek most likely trained on the outputs of OpenAI and potentially other companies' AI models. And they use that as a way to sort of shortcut and get a similar level of performance, but much cheaper. So that's called a distillation attack. There are ways that there are other kinds of vulnerabilities like this that we have to pay attention to.
Would that be a form of theft, what you were just describing?
I would say that's a form of theft, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, certainly if a U.S. company did that, their lawyers would tell them to stop. But internationally, you might care less, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think is the main roadblock for us becoming the leader in AI? Is there anything that you see as an obvious either roadblock or just a need, something that we have to develop in order to be the leader?
I think there are two main roadblocks that we have to watch out for. One, of course, as everyone talks about, is energy. And so energy is a key bottleneck in AI in large part because as we're training these AI systems and as we're deploying them over time, it requires an exponentially greater amount of energy resources. And so this is a problem because we're pretty slow to add new capacity to the grid, and there are lots of regulations that prevent us from actually building out enough energy capacity that's needed. It's also important when we're thinking about energy to make sure that we don't raise prices on ordinary consumers. We want to make sure that AI is something that benefits the common man, that makes their lives measurably better, that can take away or reduce some of the inconveniences of using robots for chores and things like that. But what we don't want is to invest all of this energy and effort into data centers only to have it increase prices for consumers.
Right.
So a way around that we've talked about is making sure that we have companies that are building data centers self-supply their own energy. That way, you're drawing from your own energy capacity, not from the grid. So that's one bottleneck to success.
That's a pretty large one, it sounds like.
It's a very, very, very big one. Another one is, I think it's very important to think about making sure that we have an America First approach to our own manufacturing in general. The president has been very adamant about this issue and talking about how we need to reshore our defense industrial base, and AI is no different. Right now, we're completely reliant on the Taiwanese for manufacturing the most advanced AI semiconductors. That's not something that we can tolerate, especially if it's the case that Taiwan gets invaded, for instance. So we have to make sure that we bring that semiconductor manufacturing back to the United States. And the administration has taken some leadership here in thinking about, Intel is one of the only companies that could maybe do that. What should relationships, public-private partnerships with Intel look like? And that's another thing where we're taking a very close look at seeing how can we reshore manufacturing. This is not only important for national security, but it's also an opportunity for the American worker. There are all kinds of ways that the data center build-out or reshoring semiconductor manufacturing can create jobs for Americans, especially construction and manufacturing jobs. So there are problems that exist to leadership, but with the solutions we can also benefit the common man.
Absolutely. So when we think about AI is really developed in the private sector, the regulations are the responsibility of government, but also the integration should be the responsibility of government too. Is there any reason that government shouldn't incorporate AI with the same desire and intensity as we see in the private sector?
The government should absolutely be incorporating AI into its operations. So there are so many ways in which government operations could be made more efficient by AI, and I think we owe it to the taxpayers to save the taxpayers their dollars and resources and respect taxpayer dollars. And if there are ways that we could be reducing costs for them, we should do that. If there are opportunities to fire bureaucrats that are not needed, we should absolutely do that. And AI provides an opportunity there for sure across many different areas.
Absolutely. I'm sure there's a lot we didn't cover, but is there anything that you think is really essential for people to know that I didn't ask about?
That's a great question. I think at the end of the day, AI is very, very exciting. There are many aspects to the modern AI paradigm that are new. But as we approach this, we have to make sure that we appreciate the opportunities that can be created, that we deregulate in selective sectors like energy to make sure that we maintain leadership. But as we lead, we can't just lead for the sake of leading. We have to make sure that we stay true to American values, and that's what we at AFPI are aiming to do.
Perfect. Yusuf Mahmood, AI Policy Director for AFPI. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This was great. If you want to learn more about AI, you want to know what we're doing in the AI space, because we're going to continuously update with new policy papers, articles, op-eds, videos on this topic, go to americafirstpolicy.com, and you can check out more on our social media channels as well. Thank you.